Hello, friends, and welcome back to Reiki Crossroads and Connections, where we're exploring the pathways and practices that support you in living a life that is grounded, that is spacious, that is connected, and that help us all to remember ourselves. And we're doing this through conversations between a Reiki teacher and practitioners in a wide range of realms: healing realms, psychology, art, spirituality, science, magic, music, and a whole lot more. And we're exploring the connections between these diverse practices to illuminate the healing patterns that humans have created throughout our existence. Thank you so much for joining us on these next few steps of the journey. And today we get to dive into a topic that is one that I often have very rich conversations with my other kind of Reiki business colleagues, kind of behind the scenes. And I'm so thrilled to be able to bring this conversation into this more public space and to talk about it in ways that already have been nourishing and eye-opening. And that is the topic of financial wellness and energetic finance. How can we be in relationship with our financial life in ways that are in integrity, that are aligned with our values, and that flow through our spiritual practices, rather than feeling like they're somehow in conflict with those practices? And today we have an excellent guide to help us with this inquiry, Candis Fox. Help me welcome Candis into this space. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So just to help us all get circled in together, get organized together and into the same space, I'd love to just share what I know about you already,
Okay.
what we kind of have as our foundation, and then we will build from there. Yeah.
Perfect.
So you have combined your 10 years in cognitive and behavioral science, your master's in education, and a lifelong study of myth and human patterning to provide leaders and businesses with sustainable, effective strategies and practices for matching internal and external success through the art of relating. And I love everything in that description. Like everything inside of that feels like such a yes. And really just brings as a starting point a lot of gratitude to you for doing that work, because I've worked in organizations and universities and consulting with government agencies and businesses for a long, long time. And these perspectives are needed. And there's this growing awareness of that, right? And I'd love, I'm sure as we get into our conversation, we can maybe touch on what that's been like for you working more directly in this realm of kind of what that awareness looks like and where it's at. But before we dive into all of that juiciness, I'd love to just begin again setting our foundation by asking how you're doing today. How is your day and what's on your heart?
Oh, goodness. I am, well, for those of you who interact with tarot cards, my tarot card this month is the Tower, and I pulled the Tower yesterday. And so today I'm still kind of reeling from that kind of reconstructive energy. And so I'm in a place where I'm really feeling like I've taken everything to the studs as a person and energetically and in my practice and in my business. And I've really distilled things. And now I get to rebuild in a way that is more in my favorite self's image, I guess. And so it's kind of a lot for a morning, not gonna lie. So to like bring myself back down into more earthly realms, I have a lovely cup of tea and some moss on the wall behind me to just kind of bring me back. I've been going through a lot, and I'm also just like so happy to know that this podcast exists and that you've been putting this work together for so long and sharing all of these beautiful, intricate, and intriguing ways to invoke and play with and move energy. I'm feeling a lot and inspired. So that's a thick answer, but that's where I'm at. So
I love it, right? Like we're looking for real answers to the question of how are you?
Yeah.
this here space, right? It's a challenge I often offer to myself, even in those kind of transactional interactions that we just have with people in our life all the time, where the question, "How are you?" "I'm fine," like that transaction, which sometimes is
Sure.
absolutely the way to go. But I've like been cultivating the discernment of like, could I tell a little bit of the truth? Like,
Mm.
not to like now just brain dump onto this poor person who just is trying to move on with their day, but like, is there one little sentence that's just a little bit more true than "I'm fine," or like a little bit more detailed,
Mm.
And so,
Mhm.
having spaces where we can just say the truth, is not only, liberating, but I think it also opens us up to better conversation, right? Because, even that juxtaposition between the like, "Oh, that was a lot for a morning," and, and then like a cup of tea, like holding those two things in the same space is, part of what we're building our capacities for. So perfect
Well,
answer.
on that note, how are you?
Thank you for asking. Yeah, as I was saying when we jumped on earlier, I'm fairly scatterbrained today. Um,
Yeah.
there is also just a lot going on in my world. I feel like for those of you who watch this series, first of all, thank you for being here.
Yeah.
It's nice to know we're not just crying into the void. There's other people there. You've heard me say this the last few episodes, is there's just a lot going on in my world that are like very potent in positivity and in a lot of difficulty. And, we get to have seasons of life like that, right? And
Yeah.
I'm feeling a lot of gratitude that I can navigate it in ways that I couldn't before, and grateful for having the practices, as we said, like we've dedicated our lives to practices that help us to navigate these sorts of things. And it's nice to see like when the rubber hits the road that, oh, they work.
Yes. Yes, they do work. Isn't
What
that
good
something?
news.
It sounds like you're getting a lot of reinforcement.
Yeah, yeah, it's good. It's good. And then part of that also, it's like, yeah, it's the practices, it's the spirituality, it's the meditation, it's the
Mm.
frameworks of the values, but it's also the like coming back to the basic needs, right? So the cup of tea, the giant jar of lemon water, like just these things that can be dismissed as like whatever mundane, like that's actually what helps to get through, is to stay hydrated and make sure that we have spaces where we feel comforted and cared for and all of that. So just feeling the bigness of all of that, and the intimacy of it at the same time.
Yeah. Do you feel like you have enough support? And
I do. Yeah, I have really good support, and still am lonely sometimes, right? It's like it's both. It's all the pieces, there's areas of life that feel very full and others that feel very empty. And that's again the season of life, and it's okay. And um we can track those patterns in those moments when we're with our moss and we're with our tea and we're with ourself, and just say, okay, I see the place to rebuild, right? That metaphor of taking your house down to the studs was like so powerful when you said that. I feel that. And what a risk to like take your house apart while you're still living in it, which I literally did. When we built my studio that I'm in right now, it's a second story that we added to the house, and we also built a little mother-in-law unit for my mom. And one of the big things happening is she's finally claiming that space, so we're in all
oh,
the process of my mom moving in. Um, but literally took almost the whole house down to studs, and like walls were gone. The ceiling was off the house for a piece of time. And it's a it's a vulnerable experience to see your house like in this deconstructed space, even with all your stuff still in it. My kid
yeah.
had a total meltdown the first time we like came home, and like the siding was off the house,
Oh my gosh.
It was
Oh
like
my
she just walked into a operating room and saw her grandmother with the, all opened up on a surgery table. And it was really humbling to like, yeah, we're taking our life apart, and we're gonna see how it works to put it back together. And so I feel like going through that like physical, literal experience, was so valuable in the metaphoric realm as well. So yeah, when you said that, I was like, oh yeah.
I know what that feels like. Yeah. Well, incredibly vulnerable and expensive, not just in finances, but like in your emotional energy, all of the other, your time. We have so many resources. And when you take yourself or your home or your business even down to the studs, like it's not just vulnerable, it's expensive.
Yeah.
And it's not something that everybody can do right now,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely. Yeah, that piece of really respecting where we're at is such an
mhm.
important piece. Like knowing where we're at, respecting it, knowing where the boundary is, where we're going to tip over into too much, and
Mhm.
and pushing up against it at the right amount is a skill set, to
Absolutely.
really
Yeah.
cultivate. And sometimes it takes tipping into out of tolerance, out of resonance a few times to
Yeah.
be able to feel where that boundary is. So,
Mhm.
these practices help us to do that with much more clarity and precision, um,
Grace.
and, and grace. Yeah, that part. And you're doing this work in organizations, right? You're doing this work, I'm sure, for yourself and those in your life, and then professionally with organizations, with entities that are made up of many people that are doing their best to work together towards a goal. And one of those goals is financial, is running a profitable business, making sure that employees are taken care of financially. I would imagine you also work with individuals around their own financial structure. And you're doing this in a way that brings this landscape of spiritual sensitivity into it in a very explicit way. And I'm so curious about that, again, from my own experiences of interfacing with these worlds in ways that sometimes felt very welcoming and sometimes felt very not. And so I'd
Mhm.
like to just really begin by inviting you to share a little bit about the journey that you've taken to come to this work. We all have a tapestry of our life that's made up of many threads, and on any given day, one or more of those threads might have the most meaning. So I'd love to invite you to just share, in this moment, what has the most meaning around the threads in your life that you followed to bring this particular alchemy of experiences together.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I feel like I answer this question differently every time that I speak with people about it, and it's because there's so much. So I'm gonna give a little bit of a cop out and just let people know that I'm a 4/6 manifesting generator, and so in human design. So if you know what that means, great. If you don't,
So
I'm
we
gonna
just
walk you
did an
through it.
episode on human design. If you haven't
Did
seen
you?
it, pause here, go back, watch it, come back. Welcome back, viewer.
Welcome back. Yeah,
Now
now
that
that
we've
you've
briefed in human design, we are back with our manifesting generator. Carry on.
Yes. Oh, I love that so much. I actually really hope that people did just go watch it and then came back. That would be the best. So it means that the first 30 years of my life are very dense. And for me, when it comes to money, I'm generationally poor,
Mhm.
and most of my family's from the South. And my mom had a really good chance at getting out. She was an Olympic athlete. She went and ran as an alternate in the 1984 Olympics. And then I was the consolation prize, hooray. But she lost her scholarship, she lost her funding. And so, because things were a little different back then.
Yeah.
And she had to work a very hard manual labor job. And we just never really got anywhere. Now, we ended up moving, her and I, to Virginia to be with my stepdad. And his family came from old money in
Mm.
Pennsylvania. And so we lived on a large piece of property. I didn't have to worry about food scarcity. I got to live with the land and understand patterns. I was raised by my Grammy, who was part of this like huge neo-pagan Irish tradition revival in the 90s. She was like friends with Anne Mora, I think, if you know who that is. And she taught me everything I know about energy movement and how to move energy, understand it, and listen to spirit. And so from a very young age, I learned to move with that. As I grew older, I experienced a lot of fluctuations, mostly staying under the poverty level, and I was a teacher. All right. So that should give you some idea of the kind of money that I was making for a while. And then you know what? I had a brain injury. I didn't even choose to walk away from that. I had a brain injury and I couldn't do it anymore. And so I had to get creative and say, what can I do? And I wanted to open my own business. And I realized once I decided I wanted to open my own business, I realized that I had some pretty unhelpful money patterns. Like I was so down on myself all the time, and I never thought that I'd be able to get enough money. I just thought it was all completely insurmountable. Now, granted, I do have a couple of things going for me, right? I have skin privilege. I'm kind and relatively well spoken. I was able to afford a college degree. And so, and by barely. And then, of course, back then it was much more affordable. Had I gone to school even 3 years later, I wouldn't have been able to afford it. I just squeaked in.
Yeah.
And so I have these things working for me, but I realized that like there was so much more of me getting in my own way. And so I reached out. I wanted to get some help. I did. I realized that this kind of job existed in the first place. And I was like, oh, wow, this is perfect for me, actually. This takes everything that I love, everything that matters to me, and gives me an opportunity to grow more in myself and then share it in wider arenas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Yeah.
painting that landscape. And the way that our lives like ebb and flow and shift, and then this realization of your relationship to this important piece that was all of a sudden front and center as you were required to change jobs. I'm just, yeah, I feel the tenderness of that moment and that realization. Yeah.
Well, yeah. And I mean, truthfully, at that moment, I could have backed away. I could have let those unhelpful inherited money mindsets keep me back. I could have, nobody would have said anything different. It would have been completely acceptable. And I wanted something else.
Yeah.
I wanted more.
I'm curious about if it's okay to dig a little bit into what you just
Sure.
shared. A couple of the themes that really stood out. Firstly, um, this juxtaposition of lifestyle in terms of before and after moving to Pennsylvania. And I'm curious how that impacted your awareness of financial life. There we have some similarities and some differences. My immediate childhood was in a lot of poverty,
Mhm.
but my family was stable. Not wealthy, but had lived the American dream, and my grandparents were quite stable, and had done all the things that their generation was supposed to do to kind of come up out of the depression and get established and make it in this world, like very
Mhm.
much quintessential American dream story. And so
Yeah.
we always had that as a foundation of support, even though my immediate experience was very poor. And that did interesting things to my mindset, that I've been tracking since I've been making a go at being a business owner. And like, when you step out of like just straightforward employment with somebody else to like, I have to create the conditions for my own employment,
Mhm.
like it really does require us or invite us, have to do anything, but invite us into this kind of assessment, right? Like, what is my relationship and where did it come from? And so knowing that I had a little bit of a odd like thing happen in my brain with those two, the juxtaposition of those two things, I'm imagining that something similar might have happened for you. So I'd love to just maybe dig into that a little bit.
Yeah. Before I answer your question, I have a question for you and your listeners to ponder for a moment. So I'm going to leave an awkward silence after I ask. I love those. All right. My question is, what is your first memory of money?
Good question.
All right. If you notice any tension anywhere in your body, any kind of feelings, just remember that anytime you engage with money, we're subconsciously bringing in that tension pattern. So for me, to get to your question, my first memory of money was one of absolute scarcity. And I remember very clearly that my mom had come home from work. I was maybe two. I could barely walk. I couldn't reach the stove. But she was crying, and I was hungry. And, she talked about money and how we didn't have enough money. And I was like, I didn't have any idea what money was, but I knew that if I made my mom a sandwich, then maybe she would feel better. And so I don't even know. It honestly could have just been a piece of folded bread. Okay. But I made her a sandwich, and then she stopped and she looked at me, and then she just broke into tears, just really lost it. And I was just like, wow, money is bad. Like whatever it is, like it's really hurting my mom. And so with that being kind of my first understanding of money, and also notice in that story too, I didn't make myself a sandwich, right? And then moving to Virginia with all of that space and finding, enough food. I mean, we had an orchard. There was food dropping from the trees, like I lived in literal abundance. And to feel that juxtaposition, it sparked a dream in me.
Mm.
And not one of like only for me, but for as many people as I could share it with. Like, I didn't want anybody to feel like money was a bad thing, because look, there's enough for us to share. There's enough resources, whatever they may be, whether that be time, energy, um, our creativity, our capacity for love, like all of these beautiful resources and money are available to us. And so I knew then experientially that something else was available.
Yeah.
And that's not something everybody gets to experience.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's really connected to the other piece that stood out to me, which is that when you moved to Virginia, I said Pennsylvania earlier, apologies for that. Um, that the place where you received that education around abundance and around enough, and the connection between, you know, needs being met in such a fertile, joyful way and money was directly in relationship with the land.
Yes.
And, you know, being in a place that was had natural beauty, that had cultivated beauty, that had this, I would imagine, so now my mind is like imagining, so, filling in my own blanks. But what I'm feeling is this witnessing of the relationship between human, you know, design and building things and creating the spaces that we need, doing that with some financial resourcing and the land. And the fact that that happened in a space that was natural and to a certain degree. And again, this kind of, it seems like this blending of natural spaces and then cultivated spaces, which are nature and humanity and relationship. Um, what an interesting and powerful way to receive those lessons, as opposed to other ways that, you might have moved into the middle of Manhattan and like into a penthouse and like had a, equally, a relationship with abundance that would have maybe felt different. So, and then the fact that you had this family member, this grandparent who could give you some context, right, between human spiritual perspective and practice and endeavors, and the land as our first and greatest teacher. And so I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit around that particular source of the messaging and the embodied experience of abundance, and just how that's impacted your journey.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, my understanding of wealth and abundance is, yes, we have energetic abundance, and also all of our wealth comes from the earth, all of it. And it returns to the earth in its own way, right? And so when I love that you brought this up, because this is one of those things that I meet a lot of other, financial wellness coaches or people who are doing energetic finance, and it's so easy to get caught up in the thoughts and to get caught up in the theories of what it means to be abundant and what it feels like. But truly, like, if we're not in right relationship with the land in some way, feeling truly abundant is just harder. It is easier to feel abundant when you have a relationship with land. And again, not something everybody currently has access to. And so, when I'm thinking of, maybe a high rise in Manhattan, how much green space does that person really see? How much opportunity do they have to know what the names of the plants even that they might pass on the street, right? Or even which ones might be edible, like there's a lot of really beautiful urban foragers who are out there pointing out all of these beautiful species that we can engage with. But like, truly like it's a different kind of poverty, right? In that kind of space. And yeah, for me, it's just so much easier to recognize abundance when we remember our and practice our right relationship with the earth. And I mean, Indigenous people have been telling us that forever. So maybe we should listen. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a humbling lesson, particularly when framed in that way, in that historically, and I know that you know a lot about kind of our historical relationship with money and kind of how that has been, how that has served oppressive aims. I mean, we could go to the founding of this country. We came here for money. Like we came here, we tell the story of coming here for freedom, but ultimately, my ancestors came here to seek fortune and to seek resources,
Mhm.
and did so with great relish and great devastation, and overlooked almost entirely the balance of relationship with the land and therefore abundance that was already present here. So many clear learnings about abundance that didn't even exist, in Europe where we came from. Great poverty, was escaped there. So there's so much tangled up in that. And it can get very complex and it can get very confusing. And for those of us who, deeply want to untangle those hurts in whatever way our tiny life can do that, it can be incredibly overwhelming. And, what I hear you speaking to is the utility and the magic of coming back to relationship with the land as a way to do that work of untangling harm, potentially, depending on how it's done, and and to do it in a way that brings us back to the simple, direct, clear relationships that matter the most. And to be able to hold that with my relationship with the land is my relationship with history, because
Mhm.
every footstep that has walked on this land is still here,
Yes.
including mine. And the people who walked this land a long, 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 long time ago are probably still here, right?
Mhm.
And that's a relationship that can be built. Um, and what's happening in my mind is this beautiful kind of alchemy between the like utility of looking at finance and looking at money as a necessity in our life. That's how our society is organized as far as how we exchange needs.
Mhm.
Um, but bringing that back to the heart and spirit of the matter, right? Because it is about needs and it is about relationship.
Yes.
Fundamentally, all of this is about meeting needs and being in relationship. And
Yes.
what are the qualities that our strategies for doing those two things have? And do those qualities serve life or do they serve stagnation?
Right.
Um, and so you're kind of offering a pathway into something that's incredibly complex and overwhelming, but a way that kind of brings it back to the heart of the matter. But like, what is this really about? It's about meeting needs in relationship and doing
Mhm.
that well according to principles that make the earth work, right? So I'm going to pause there to just see what maybe is stirring around that, and then I have a couple of more direct questions about that.
Yeah, I can speak to some of it a little bit. Yes, relationship and getting our needs met. That is how humans exist. We are weird bipedal mammals who stand up and have these strange, fragile bodies and these way fragile, creepy brains. And they do weird things and
Accurate.
they're amazing. But we're so unique on our earth, right? And part of the reason why we have survived is because we're able to navigate our needs together, right? And so when we participate, even unknowingly, in supremacy mindsets or things that rank us against other people, we are participating more in that. It gives us a justification for extraction, right? And so, and it sneaks in all sorts of ways. And I haven't met a single person, granted they're coming to me for money things, but I haven't met a single person just like out in the wild who has a clean, happy, clear relationship to money without having examined it, right? We have complicated pasts, especially people in America. We have, from all over the world, we have destitution and poverty and pain and extraction and what it means to like benefit from that extraction. We have complicated lineage around money. And as us, you know, all of our energy healers out there know, spirit workers, you know, however you like to bring your modality forward, we know that when we heal ourselves in a deep and impactful way, we're not just healing ourselves, right? And so when we engage with a conscious relationship to money and a right relationship with the earth and to each other, we're not just healing ourselves here. We're healing the entire environment around us and everybody who comes into that realm, right?
Yeah.
It's powerful.
Yeah. It is powerful, and it's something that is so nuanced because there are ways, and I'm speaking from my own experience and witnessing in others, there's ways in which we can go about that personal work that doesn't take into account necessarily that relational aspect, or that focuses on certain aspects that we want to bring alive in our life and disregards others. And and I don't say that to make it seem like a scary thing to do, or like, oh, no, maybe I shouldn't go into that whole realm of self-improvement because it's so complex. But to acknowledge that that these processes have layers to them, and that we need to be able to be in our self, in our individual process, and to be able to chart that map. And again, being in relationship with others and being able to kind of feel into, am I on a path that is, serving connection and is serving life beyond my own life, I have found to be such a powerful and important like next step. And one of the ways that this can manifest in really challenging ways, and in ways that can, perhaps unknowingly increase harm,
Yeah.
is, we can use the term spiritual bypassing as a kind of umbrella
Mhm.
term, which is a concept that we've talked about on this channel before, and is one that I know you work with, and that you kind of directly address as you're working with people around money. And so I'd love to just invite you to, first of all, describe what you mean when you talk about spiritual bypassing, and then maybe we can get a little bit into how we as people who are seeking to repair relationships with ourselves, with the land, with each other, can avoid the pitfall of that, and do something different in how we engage in our relationships around spirituality.
Yeah, to explain what I mean by spiritual bypassing, I'm going to use a bit of a metaphor. Okay. So let's say that you live in a village, and then you walk outside this village and you find this beautiful fountain, and you come back and you feel healed and amazing, and everything over by this fountain is incredible. There's all the food you could want. It's delicious. Life is great. If you don't bring some of that back, how are you living? Are you living in your integrity? If you don't go back and tell people about it, what are you up to? Right? So when I mean spiritual bypassing, I know that when we dive into our spiritual selves, it is delicious. It feels so good. And sometimes we just want to tell everybody about it and bring everybody in, and that's beautiful. And if we're not doing it in a way that is in relationship, and what I mean by that is like really relating to difference as it is and not needing it to change for our own comfort, when we are able to bring it back to the mundane, that's where the real change happens, right? And money is this beautifully strange connection between the two of them, right? Similar to our own bodies, right? Like we are between the heavens and the earth. We are connected within each other. Money is this thing where when we open ourselves up to it and have experienced it in a way that is in our integrity, we get to blend the two in ways that maybe we hadn't thought of before. And it just feels totally different, and I'm going to give you a bit of an, an example of a really sneaky way that sometimes we can practice spiritual bypassing and actually be practicing, well, spiritual bypassing and supremacy mindsets.
Yeah,
And this is going to be a little sneaky.
do
So if
it.
you're feeling defensive while you're listening, I'm going to bring it back around, okay? It's going to be all right. We're
Stay
going to
with
be
us.
okay.
It's gonna be fine.
Sometimes, now this isn't every time because it is important to be generous, but sometimes I've seen like Reiki practitioners, for instance, I'm just going to use this as an example. All right. Sometimes we're like, I just want to provide my services for free. Love that. Love the spirit of it. Very generous, very sweet. But sometimes there's a part of us that wants to do that for two reasons. One, because it makes us feel good, or makes us look like good people, or it makes us look like we're practicing the values of energetic generosity. It doesn't nourish us other than the energetic exchange, right? That's great. That's always there. Yeah. But it doesn't nourish our bodies in a way that's like food related or housing related. And those things cost money. Right. So it also opens us up to working with people who aren't actually ready to receive the healing.
Mm.
And those people sometimes, and again, these are all a little conditional, all right? We're just funneling down to a very sneaky way it comes in sometimes. Sometimes those people who aren't ready for the healing will seek out people who will treat them for free because they want that healer to take responsibility for their healing, not themselves.
Mm.
So in this case, in this very narrow instance, money is a way to ensure that that person is ready and not trying to make you into a savior as a healer,
Oof.
right?
Mhm.
Yeah. And when we step into that kind of like savior mode, that's when we're practicing spiritual bypassing. That's when we're practicing supremacy mindsets. We're saying, okay, I'll save you because I can, and I'm better. And I just, it hurts.
Yeah.
It hurts.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you took us into that hypothetical. And I just invite, myself and those of us watching to just kind of sit with that example that Candice just shared. And using it as a mirror, right? Because a couple of things that I'm hearing inside of that. Firstly, the importance of really, if we're gonna, I mean, in our lives generally, but in particular, so right now we're speaking of and to, those who have made it um, our work in the world, whether it's paid or not, something that we're gonna give out into the world, um, something that's intended to help people, something that's intended to offer healing, that's intended to offer transformation for people. The absolute essential nature of continuing to be in that reflective process to understand our motivations. What is it? Why am I doing this? Right? And what are the conditions that I'm creating in the doing of it?
Mhm.
Um, and I love that you describe this as sneaky, right? Because it is so sneaky.
It is.
So many things can be so sneaky. It's those subconscious fears and beliefs, and that place inside of ourself that still feels not enough and that is desperately trying to keep us safe from the consequences of not being enough, and that is very, very sneaky in how it directs our behavior and our thinking.
Mhm.
And in this example around whether or not we donate our services,
Right.
it's a conversation that happens all the time. Like it is a ripe, form of conversation amongst folks with very different opinions around it. And if we just kind of look at it at the surface, there's this should Reiki, using that as an example, or other similar practices be offered for free? And there's, often a perspective that absolutely they should be 100% free because Reiki is free and this should be freely given for generosity's sake. And anybody who's charging money has ill intentions, and that is
Oh,
not
what a
how it should be
judgment.
done, right?
Mm. Yeah.
I like have had that conversation so many times.
Mhm.
And then on the other side, of course, we can easily see a toxic, like opposite version of that, where like, this is about that grind, this is about that hustle, this is about making that money. And unfortunately, there's people who have used spiritual practice to enrich themselves and have been manipulative in that and have been
Yeah.
bypassed in that way. And I think sometimes we can be so afraid of being that person that
Right.
we defer over to this place that actually keeps us impoverished and keeps us out of abundance and keeps us out of feeling resourced
Mhm.
and feeling that our communities are resourced. And this example that you gave around, the potential, right? Not that this is the case in every case, right? That, I mean, there's certainly times when I'm offering a free service to somebody because they are ready and it is the right exchange and it feels
Absolutely.
in good integrity to be in an exchange that doesn't involve money. Um,
Yeah.
but the potential there that either I am doing that because I value the way that this makes me feel like a
Yeah.
powerful, good person more than I value relationship and needs. And then the potential that for the other person, they're trying to get that easy fix, right? And as you say, that
Right.
deferring to the other person to take care of it without kind of stepping into their own power and their own responsibility. Such, again, not generalizing that's always the case, but the potential for that has so much potential to um, be the opposite of what we're going for, that it needs to be examined. And
Yeah.
when we think about spiritual bypassing, I'm also seeing in your examples that we can do that to ourselves.
Yep.
We can say, well, the higher good here is that I, um, fix people's problems and I do it for free and I give them a diagnosis and I tell them what to do and I take control of their healing because I'm the expert and I know how to do that. Um, and that can lead to bypassing other people, right? Because if we're the expert and we know everything about everything and we know more about their healing journey than they do, and they report something to us that feels like negativity or,
Mhm.
maybe they don't like something that we've done, right? And they point that out to us, right? I've seen it happen that the response to that is, oh, but this is part of your healing journey, right? That negative experience that you just had, maybe with me or with somebody else, right? It was meant to happen because that's part of your healing journey. And so reflect on what you're supposed to learn from that experience, right? So using my spiritual practice to bypass
Mhm.
something that somebody is reporting back to me that they need addressed. And these things are so sneaky
Very.
because they're couched in this language that is so juicy and that is so positive,
Mhm.
and so so many examples that we could go into in a lot of depth in that conversation, but I think it's really important to ground this conversation about spiritual wellness and financial wellness in this context with an awareness of that, and with an invitation for us to open that awareness if we haven't already,
Mhm.
to let it be there, right? And if it feels too overwhelming, use our practices to make more space for it.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely.
Feel ourselves pushing towards our tolerance limit, but letting us stretch a little bit. I do want to say for any of you who are like, this is a new concept and it feels scary and gross and is doing weird things inside of me, you're not alone. And
Mhm.
we'd love to talk to you about that. There's lots of ways to
Absolutely.
be with the discomfort of confronting the way in which supremacy culture is in fact embedded in us because it is what we have been raised inside of.
Mhm.
That's not our fault, but it's our responsibility, especially once we have become aware of it. So
Absolutely.
there's a lot of resources for helping us work through this particular part of the landscape. So
Thank goodness.
thank
Well, and
goodness.
with the, I often find that with the, when we find those little sneaky things, one of the best ways that I've found to really kind of discover them is actually by being a little sneaky. So like when I'm working with my clients, in some ways, I have to kind of like engage enough relationship and trust that I'm going to trick them a little bit.
Yep.
And it's not and we're going to find out what the truth is, because I don't know what it is. But one of the ways that I get to engage with that kind of, I'm going to say, like, loving trickster energy
Mhm.
is with my quiz. I have a 2-minute quiz. It's an archetype quiz. And what I love about archetypes is that they can help us find these subconscious tricky patterns. Instead of having to think our way around them, they just kind of show us who we are.
Yes.
And they're never going to fit perfectly. Like, even human design is a kind of trickster archetype system, right? Anytime we're engaging in astrology or human design or um, whatever, even like different deity systems, we're engaging with ways to see ourselves. And they expose it by being a little tricky. And I love that. And I think it's so fun. So I wanted to involve that in my own process consensually as much as possible, because it can kind of, you were mentioning that kind of sting or that heaviness or that kind of like, ooh, overwhelming feeling. When we can make it playful, it's not as hard. It doesn't feel as heavy. And, like, I don't know if you noticed, but like, I smile and laugh a lot with this stuff because it is what it is. Like, we don't need to carry the shame about it. We
Yeah.
can just be like, I'm going to trick myself into thinking something else. Great.
Yeah. Yeah.
How easy
What
was
a
that?
cool capacity to have, right?
Right?
Yeah, that's such a valuable perspective and reminder. I've really kind of been with that concept a lot lately in some of these areas of my life that are feeling heavy is like how to make this a game, how to make this playful, how to
Yeah,
be, stay curious, how to hold this lightly. Notice, and I love the way you talk about the trickster archetype, right? Which shows up in
everywhere.
every culture, this energy of like having the big picture, right? Like the trickster like has the big picture. Like that energy understands where we're from and where we're going. It understands the connections of things. It understands how utterly insignificant each of us are, and yet also so um, sovereign and full of potential inside of that landscape. And then is able to see the foibles and the ways to trick us
Yeah.
into participating more deeply with life. And sometimes that can feel really hard and nasty but for the most part, at least the way that I relate to that archetype is that ultimately that archetype is looking out for the web of life and the arc of life, and really imploring us to be in good relationship with our place inside of it, and seeing where we step out of place and step out of alignment, forgetting that we are, after all, an animal in this world of, as you say, a very weird, um, unique animal, but an animal nonetheless. So I love that. And then you mentioned shame a moment ago, and I feel like that's an important thing to also kind of explicitly talk about because there's so much shame around money, so
Yep.
much shame around not having enough. There can be shame about having too much. There can be shame about having resources that other people don't. There can be shame about, needing to, meet needs for ourselves and our kids and our families that we can't meet. I mean, it's just layer upon layer of shame, potentially, right? Not necessarily, but potentially. But I feel like most people have some experience of shame around money in some way. I certainly have a vast collection of those moments. And so I would imagine when you're working with people individually and probably particularly collectively within organizations, that this is something that you're aware of and that
Mhm.
perhaps gets addressed in particular ways. And so I wonder if you could speak to that piece because it's
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot of ways to address shame. One of them is privately, which is a little more difficult, to be honest. And the other is, I'll often, I'll get brought in to do workshops, or sometimes they're semi-anonymous, sometimes they're not. And then sometimes, I'll run a workshop and just people will show up from wherever. And what's great about those collective experiences is that they're starting to see, oh, I'm not alone. Or they're trying, like, they start to see how they relate to other people's shame or other people's stories. And because, that's what shame does to us. It really isolates us.
yeah.
And so when we're able to hear about even just having this podcast right now, I know somebody out there is saying, oh, I felt that before and I don't have to feel that way anymore. Oh my gosh, what? you know? And so whenever we share our stories, whenever we have that kind of strength and vulnerability, that shame just kind of gently washes away. And it really is gentle.
Yeah.
It's not this like big forced experience. It's like, oh, and we just breathe a little easier, right? And there's that gentleness is just so beautiful to watch. I mean, I can run a workshop and just see people's bodies relax as somebody sharing their story because they're like, oh, I'm not alone anymore. I don't have to carry that by myself, or I don't have to carry it at all. And that's when, shame really starts to change in us. And I feel it's a wonderful privilege to facilitate and to witness. I get to swim in that all the time.
So powerful. I mean, shame is such a driver of shitty behavior, like
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
and unkindness to ourselves and to each
Mhm.
other. And Brene Brown talks about the fact that shame can't survive the light of day. And so,
Yeah.
as you say, bringing, speaking the things that are shameful and doing that in a container that has certain parameters is so important. And yeah, that experience of that, just that visceral, like, oh, that relief of like, wow, I don't have to hold this quite so tightly, or like this thing that it feels so shameful and such a secret, like, oh, these other people have had that experience, or they don't hate me because I just said that I had this experience.
Right. Well, and that's the other thing is like punishment culture is so strong in America that like we think if we do anything wrong, we're going to get punished. And the truth is, yeah, we might. But when we share our stories in a punishment-free space, and that's like a little different than a safe space. We don't necessarily need to get into that right now unless you want to. But when we practice in a punishment-free space, now we're seeing that somebody else's truth isn't getting punished.
That's right.
Oh, maybe I can share my own too,
That's right.
right? That's huge.
I think that's a really important distinction, the safe space as almost an impossible or ideal,
Yeah.
right? I can't ever guarantee anybody else's safety. I can do absolutely everything within my knowledge and power to say the right things and do the right things and create the space the right way. And somebody can walk in with something that I don't know about or that I do and I'm not skillful to deal with, and something happens that makes them feel unsafe.
Mhm.
I can't control what other people are going to say in the space, right? And
Right.
and so it's just that it's valuable to hold that ideal. I think that we deserve safety, right? That
Yes.
is something that we deserve to have, and that, as you said before, we have these delicate, weird bodies, and it's a complex world that can hurt us 5 billion different ways.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I love this idea of a punishment-free space. Like there might be unsafety. You might experience pain and discomfort. You probably will. And
Mhm.
guess what? You can survive that, right? But we're not going to punish you for what is going to be said. And the relief of that is so powerful. And the way that that helps us to grow, right? And to go through
Mhm.
that discomfort of growth. Because when we're ashamed and we can't talk about the thing, we can't grow. We can't
Right.
change. And I'm thinking about, you've asked such really wonderful questions, that those first memories of money, and looking at the threads of our life related to that. And one thing that came up as you were speaking about shame was, related to this experience that I had of like my lived direct experience of my childhood was of a lot of poverty. But what I didn't know is that we were never going to not have enough food because my grandparents were never going to let that happen. Like there was money available to us. It just wasn't generated in my household. So we
Mhm.
were never going to like fail completely, right?
Mhm.
Like there was that safety net, and therefore I was able to go to college because damn it, my grandfather's granddaughter was going to go to college. Like that was never not going to happen. I didn't know that growing up, right? But that was
Right.
always this thing. And so, having an experience, I remember a conversation with some colleagues in the program that I was in, and they were, just very tenderly talking about their worry about their student loan debt and how like, God, we're about to graduate. I don't even know. Like I had to take out so much more money than I thought, and these predatory loans, and like that was just starting to be a thing that people were aware
Yeah.
of, the predatory nature of student loans. And
Mhm.
I was just sitting there in so much shame because like I was like, I don't have student loan debt. Like
Wow.
I
Yeah.
just my shit just got paid for. Like and I didn't even question it. Like I didn't even just like, yeah,
That
I'm
was
just
normal.
here. Yeah, it was just like that's of course going to happen, and that moment of like not being able to grow into the moment, like I
Mm.
literally just nodded along, was like, yeah, that debt, man, yeah, that those loans.
Well, sure, we all
Um,
need to like
you
feel
know,
cohesive.
I
Right?
can't say what's really happening on my mind,
Mm.
and that was something that that it harmed the relationship, right? Because I couldn't talk about my own experiences because I was too ashamed of them, and I was too afraid of offending them, you know, or by just like being like, well, this was my experience, and wow, like thank you for sharing yours. So
Mhm.
it runs so deep, this thread of shame, and the way that our money experiences are so often tied up with shame, and
Well,
that we
and not
just
talking about it leads to so much more. I mean, even in your own story, what I heard is that like you didn't know you had a safety net. So you felt genuine scarcity,
right.
even if you had something that you didn't know you had, right? And that's, I can imagine that your parents didn't really talk about it, did they?
Oh no, we did not talk about money. There was, similar kind of moments where you would hear the scarcity language, but it's not like we were in conversation about, well, here's, how our needs are met, and here's where we,
Hmm.
and there was a lot of guilt that my mother felt about that, about not being able to provide the way that she wanted to, and that led to a lot of weird shit about, you know, just her over giving of herself. And so, like, back to that conversation about should we offer our services for free? Like, I have a very deep, like, indoctrination that, like, it is not okay for me to prosper from this work because
Mm.
I did have that safety net and I was given so much. And so I should
Oh.
give, right? And it's like, when I'm in a healthy place with that, when I'm in a balanced place with that, because I work with this, have for some time, when I'm in a balanced place with that, I can lean into honesty about what I need, like what I need to charge for things, and what, um, how much percentage of my time can be volunteer. I'm aware of that, and I communicate it clearly.
Mhm.
And um,
Well, and
and
it sounds like you
there's times I
understand.
can't.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you understand your capacity and
I'm
what
getting
you
there.
have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's still a like, this weird journey of running your own business. I still undercharge for things, and I still like it's still there. But it's a growth edge, right? That comes out, and being able to understand where those edges come from. And if we're feeling shamed or if we're feeling obligated, right? Because generosity should
Really.
come from connection. It shouldn't come from obligation,
Right.
because then it becomes transactional. It becomes like, well, I was generous for you, and so
Mhm.
shouldn't you be generous to me? Like, it gets messy. It gets
Yeah.
unclear when we're not clear about our needs to begin with. And if we're treating generosity as transaction, we're not in integrity with generosity. And
Right. And
again,
that's
it's sneaky though, because we don't always know, right?
right. And that's where the relating piece is so important, right? So communicating our own capacity, right? Like how much can I afford to charge? How much can I afford to be generous? And being honest about it is a great place to start. And also building trust with other people and having the conversation that might look like, hey, I'm playing with my pricing. I need to adjust for the next year. Is this price going to work for you? If not, I can recommend you to somebody else who might fit your budget better. But like, I need to take care of myself. Can you help me?
Mm.
It's just it just starts things at a different place, right? And I mean, even just hearing me say that, what did it feel like in your body?
Oh, I mean, it feels like relief and integrity, right? That's like
Yeah,
the phrase "clarity is kindness" has been kind of coming into my lexicon a lot
yeah.
lately, in so many different areas of life, and that feels really true here. It's like the kindness to myself and the kindness to you. I love that
Mhm.
invitation. Can you help me?
Yeah.
Um,
Because
and
that's what we're doing. We're helping each other live and nourish each other. Like that's what money does.
it's what
It's
right.
what it can do, right? Can do many things, whatever we put on it. It's very neutral in terms of energy. So,
Yeah, that's such a that's such a radical perspective, right? I feel like most of us do not feel like money is neutral. Do you
well,
feel
we
that's
haven't
true?
had a lot of good experience with it. We've been oppressed with it, held down, our bodies restricted. with money. But truly, like, and this is my personal belief, is that it is neutral, and we can find ways to work with it that are in our integrity that actually feel good. Like money can feel good, you know,
Yeah.
and can be used well. We just don't have a lot of public examples of that.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's true. And I think that seeking out those examples, finding, like I found a business coach who very much operates in the way that you're describing and very much views money in the way that you're describing. And it was such a relief. And we really got to, in this group program, got to really be with the ways in which people who do the work that we do often come to this work from places of having been harmed, wanting to help,
Mhm.
and just not wanting to deal with the messiness of money. And then we run into poverty and we run into not having our needs met. And we run into my dishwasher's been broken for 6 months. Like, we run into those kinds of, places where we're actually hindering our ability to be of service when we do that.
Right. And hurting the energetic movement in general, right? Like if we're not resourced, we can't show up and remind people of the energetic place we come from, wherever that is. Like we can't, like the movement itself is harmed when we're not sustainable, right?
Can you
It's not just
like
us.
say that again?
Yeah. The energetic movement itself is harmed when we aren't well resourced.
There's a specific example that comes up when you say that, related to a belief that I'm aware that I have and that I work on untangling, which is that people in positions of power
Mhm.
and money, right?
Mhm.
Leaders, people in business, you know, the powerful people,
Yeah.
they don't want or need the work that I do. These are separate worlds and they don't want it. The people, so in other words, the people who could really pay for it
Yeah.
don't want it and don't need it.
You know why they want it?
Why?
Do you know why?
I mean, I know I have taught myself why, but I
Oh,
want
okay. Why? Why do
they
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 want
want it because if they haven't walked some path that helps them learn in their body how to be grounded, spacious, and connected and to remember themselves, then they could have all the money in the world and they can feel deeply unfulfilled and they can feel all of the awful ways and don't know how to get out of it. And therefore, their contribution to the world is hindered, and some part of them knows it.
walk them home? We're all lost in our own ways, all walking each other home.
And we've all been out to sea so long that we might no longer remember our own face, but
Yeah.
our home remembers us,
Yes.
and it's always there.
I love that you've been playing with that self-limiting belief and already finding ways to challenge it. It says a lot about your capacity for difference. And I love that you're taking the time to remember that, like, these people want to connect with you or your work, or that you have something of value to them. Mhm.
Well, and because, there's another belief that lives alongside that one that is the more conscious one that Reiki practiced in the way that I know it can be practiced belongs in the highest levels of leadership in the whole world, right? Or some other practice that has come authentically through, a time and place that leads to the same outcomes. And, the stronger, more conscious belief is that that changes the world. And I know that because I've seen it. And I've seen it happen inside of organizations, and I've seen it happen in the way that a person will change their own life and then go about doing their work differently. And so that's what needs to be remembered. And I think what then becomes the challenge is the cultural disconnect between the
Mhm.
culture that I'm inside of most of the time, which is very normal to me, but like sometimes I
Mhm.
get glimpses at it from the outside. It's like that's
Sure.
Like just being weird in public, I joke sometimes is like half my job. Like just, hi, like I'm highly educated. I, I can talk, certain talks. I,
Mhm.
have encounters with government and business and higher ed and all of these things. And I'm weird as fuck.
Oh
And it's
yeah.
good, it's like, and you want some of this, right? And, so I think that like and it's not that everybody who does this work needs to have that kind of clientele in mind, right? Absolutely not.
Sure.
We need this everywhere. But for those who, want to be of service to people
Mhm.
who might not necessarily be looking for the woo-woo, but who need it in their life, or they need an authentic expression of spirit in their life.
Mhm.
Um, how do we connect? How do we connect that bridge?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked that.
Ooh,
By learning how to relate to difference.
yes.
So I lead monthly practice containers for this one in particular. But there's four basic skills that we can practice. They're skills, they're not values. You can't enforce them. You can't make other people do it. They're not like people. I go into business spaces and they're like, hey, can we put this in the like HR policy? And I'm like, absolutely not. So don't do it. It doesn't work. It'll blow up in your face. It's bad. Unless you want that. I don't know. Um, but there are these four basic skills of practicing congruence and matching your insides and outsides. So when you remember that conversation that like made up one where I was like, hey, I need to nourish myself differently. Will you help me? I was able to say, this is what I need. This is where I'm at and express it. So congruence, matching our insides and outsides, and knowing when we do want to relate to difference and when we don't, or when we don't have the capacity. Okay. Because we're not perfect all the time. We don't, it's again a resource thing. Like, am I feeling resourced enough to relate to some severe difference today? No. Okay, fine. So congruence, and then there's empathy, right? Feeling as much as you can of another person's experience within yourself, and then which is an embodied experience, right? And then we have empathic listening, which is a skill of listening to follow, not to lead or guide. It's just helping, like being with somebody on their way home. Like we're literally just holding their hand. They're like, where do you live? Take me there. Or like walking into a library and saying, show me all your favorite books. Who are you? And then the final skill of unconditional positive regard. And you're nodding your head. Yes, we all understand that like what before us, what they share is their truth, regardless of what we think about it, regardless of any judgments we might have. Those don't matter. Their truth is their truth, and they know what's best for them. So we as practitioners can say, I have these skills and I think this might be coming up. Does that feel true for you? If it doesn't, we're wrong. Okay, what else we got? Try something else. So learning how to relate to difference. I mean, this skill, this foundational skill to me is the magic of being human, like, and it's the magic of money.
Yeah.
There's an expression of energy flowing between people, sovereign people who need to be nourished and cared for. How do we get those met? Right. So, yeah, relating to difference is how I see it anyway. Like how we get there.
It's so not what I expected you to share, but also perfect. And it, I often reflect on the way that, we have a deep conflict inside of ourselves as humans between, certain aspects of our biology and certain aspects of our relational evolution. And our relationship to difference is one of those places where this shows up so powerfully because we are highly wired to seek affinity and to seek sameness and to
Yes.
seek, like I know you're safe because you're like me.
Right.
Right. That runs so deep and causes so many challenges in a world that's gotten as intermingled as ours. At the same
True.
time, we have this incredible capacity and this incredible curiosity to seek novelty, to seek difference, to seek something that is new.
Mhm.
But we can't do that when we're not resourced,
Right.
right? It's when we're unresourced that we are the most uh, attached to sameness because
Mhm.
it feels the most safe.
Yep.
And so to be able to like walk through this pathway of like bringing it back to those fundamental characteristics of practicing the system of Reiki as a self practice, as it was originally intended,
Mhm.
as an offshoot of the nature-based practices of Shinto and of Japanese Buddhism, that these conditions that we need in order to do what you just described is we have to feel rooted and safe, and that we have a foundation,
Mhm.
even if our conditions have some significant unsafety to it, right? We got to feel in our body. We need to have that home
Mhm.
center to return to. And then we need spaciousness. We need to be able to look beyond our immediate self. We need to be able to hold contradiction and difference and possibility and vision. And then we need to feel connected, right? We need to feel that base of connection. And that there are, the good news is there's so many ways to cultivate those conditions inside of ourselves. And to do that with great nuance around things like money, around aspects of our life that matter and that govern things. So I so appreciate the perspectives that you're bringing, and I feel like we could talk forever and ever and ever about
Yes.
this. And I hope we'll have further conversation. And I'm curious about what other conversations might want to happen. But to kind of help us land in this particular context, this container, I'd just love to have you share a bit about how people can work with you. How they might know that this is a thread that they want to follow, and if so, how they can find you and work with you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we could talk forever, and let's have some more conversations. This stuff gets juicy. For follow-up, candisfox.com, it's Candis with an S, CandisFox.com, has all of my resources. You can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. They're all on there too. I have a workbook for people who are self-starters. That is a really great way to dip your toes in and kind of like start that process of self-discovery. And that's I always keep that one incredibly financially accessible. In fact, actually, once or twice a year, I let it go for free. So I want people to get started. I want you to start thinking about it and start framing your life in a different way if that feels good to you. I also do private coaching. I do group coaching. I'm actually working with a family right now, which is an incredible privilege and honor. I do workshops, facilitations, and do public speaking. Gosh, I like to keep the variety. Again, Manny Jenny, okay? Like I like the variety soothes me.
Hey.
I love it. Um, yeah, so I've got workshops coming up, workbook, private coaching, and yeah, even just like taking 2 minutes out of your day to take my quiz is sometimes enough for people to really get started, because then you start to see, oh, who am I in this? And you know what? Actually, I'm going to give you a tip. Take it twice.
Mm.
Take it the first time as your most favorite self, the highest self, the most like evolved, beloved self you are. And then take it as your most scaredy little, afraid, tender, scaredy little self, and see how they're different.
Yeah.
And if they're different, call me. If they're the same, chef's kiss to you. Like that's that's amazing.
Yeah. Nicely.
Yeah.
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 I am going to do that. And one of the other practices that I facilitate, and that is part of my, personal practice, is called soul collage. And it's a process of creating individual collaged images of the many parts of ourself to help, understand them and let them speak to us and
Mhm.
tell us what they need and talk to each other and all kinds of good stuff. And as you were saying that, I'm like, I know which card represents each one of those. And so I'm gonna use those cards to help me like get into that place, and I'm going to do that experiment because that sounds really
Oh,
fast.
that sounds fun.
Yeah,
Please report back.
I shall.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, all of those links for how you can connect with Candice will be, of course, down below in the description. And I'd love to end with simply a question of joy. What is bringing you joy these days or in this moment?
Oh, one thing that's really bringing me joy is air conditioning.
Blessed.
It's really rare in the Northwest to have air conditioning, and it's something that I wanted to invest in and saved up for and made happen, and I am happy about it every day in the summertime.
Foresight. That's foresight.
Hmm.
Well, we of the Central Valley of California, air conditioning is a given. That is,
Yeah.
that is there. It is there, and I am grateful for it as well. Um, I'm going to answer this question in a little bit of a different way than I usually do, because as you were talking a little bit ago, this memory came up, and it came so strongly, I actually started tearing up, and I'm like, oh God, am I going to lose it right here on this podcast? Maybe, because I'm going to tell the story.
Ooh.
And it was around this this metaphor of walking each other home, and like, and that there's this reciprocity to that experience, right? And back to the idea that like we are not the expert of somebody else's life, but we have expertise that can help them. And they are the expert of what they need, and they may need expertise, right? There's this we both have power in that process of walking home. And I love that you've been bringing so many metaphors in, and so the story came through as a metaphor. It was a memory from when I was about 10 years old, and I was put in charge of babysitting my little brothers because we of the Gen X had to do that all the time. Babysit our little siblings when we were not old enough. And I was not old enough to babysit these two children. But we went to the park, and we had a nice time playing with the dog. And then when it was time to leave, I realized that my littlest brother, who was maybe not even 3 at the time, little toddler, was absolutely missing. No idea where he was. Little Sam was gone. And I didn't know what to do about that. What do I know? I'm like 8, 10, maybe.
Ooh.
And we look for him frantically at the park. He's nowhere at the park. Nobody has seen him. And all I knew to do was like gather up the dog and my other brother and go home. Well, maybe he went home. Okay. Home was like, 4 blocks away around a couple of corners. So we
Okay.
go home, no Sam. I did not know what to do about it. Like froze up completely. Like this was before cell phones. I couldn't call my dad. He was out to dinner. I think I called my mom to like, help. Didn't occur to me to call the police. Like that was not a thing I knew that I could or should do.
Sure.
Anyway, long story short, my mom comes over. I'm panicking. My dad comes home. Ah, how is everything? We're all panicking. There's no Sam. This is now like 2, 3 hours later. Okay. It's been a minute since Sam has disappeared. And just as like my dad's getting on the phone to call the police, there's a knock on the door. And we open the door, and it is a police officer with little Sam's hand. And little Sam has come home. And of course, all of the relief. And then after the police officer has given my father a very stern lecture about putting a 10-year-old in charge of the babies, and I have gotten a stern lecture about how I need to call the police if something like this ever happens.
Mhm.
We find out what happened, and what happened was Sam got bored. He tried to walk home, didn't know the way. A neighbor saw him walking in the middle of the street and was like, well, that's not right. So, called the police. And the police came and are like, son, where's home? Like, where are you trying to get? And Sam, little toddler who, was just learning to talk, you couldn't tell him where home
Right.
was. He couldn't articulate it. He couldn't say, well, it's on this street and we're supposed to go this way and make a left and all. He couldn't tell him,
Yeah.
but he could show him.
Hmm.
And so the thing that like, ooh, there it is. Um, this image of this tiny little child and this police officer, and neither one of them has the whole map of how to get him home, but together they got him home. And thank goodness, because that could have been the worst moment of all of our lives if it had gone a different way. But just the truth of
Yeah.
that we know more than we think we do, but we might not have the whole map, and we might need somebody to hold our hand. Yeah. And I wish I had a memory of the officer's face as he told that story,
Mm.
because I feel certain that it touched him, that this tiny child knew the way home.
Yeah.
At least that's my headcanon. That's what I'm gonna choose to believe about it.
Well,
Wherever
that's so
that officer is. Thank you, sir.
beautiful.
So that memory is bringing me a lot of joy.
Thank you for sharing that. Um, I mean, you viscerally know what it means to face that kind of potential loss and responsibility, and to know what it's like to have that relief of coming home. Like you have a deep bodily knowledge of that.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, and it's hitting me too, like I wasn't even there. And that's, I mean, that's like the beauty of story. And I mean, even in you sharing that, it makes so much sense to me why you would start this podcast, why you would do the energetic work that you do, and the approach that you have to it. Like you have that deep wisdom and knowledge. It's undeniable to you.
Mm. Thank you for that reflection.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
Wow.
The stories, right?
Yeah. Dang. Hope
Dang.
y'all enjoyed that one.
And
Woo.
and I think with that, I'll invite us to, if you feel up to it, if you feel called, dear watcher, take a minute and follow the threads of your own life and find those moments in your life that reveal something about the things that you believe and the things that you value right now in your life and the choices that you're making. Right? Making those connections between those experiences and who we are now, it can fortify us. It can be very affirming, and it can reveal those places that, like, wow, do I even still need that belief anymore? Right?
Mm.
Did that experience shape me in a way that doesn't actually serve me right now? And if that feels true to you, and if you feel like you need support in that, then find somebody to hold your hand. Maybe it's Candace, maybe it's me, maybe it's somebody else. But let's walk this journey together. That's what we're meant to do. It's how we've always survived as a species. And we're not meant to be isolated. We're meant to be sovereign, but we're not meant to be isolated. Yeah. With that mic drop,
Mhm.
let's close for today. So friends, thank you so much for walking on this journey. Candace, thank you so much for being in this conversation, for saying yes, and for doing this work in the world. And friends, let us know what has stood out to you about this conversation, what stories have come to your mind, what realizations you might have had. Share that with us down in the comments and reach out in any way that feels good to you. And may this conversation serve you and provision you in some way as you go throughout your day, whatever this day brings for you. May you be deeply provisioned for it. Thank you so much for being with us. We love you. Till next time. Goodbye.